So, Rob, let's talk about it, man. Let's talk about instructors. All right. So you put up something that I think that a lot of people, and no matter what they do in life, I don't care if you teach elementary school or what you do in life. And I'm going to be paraphrasing you because I can't remember the write-up you put in total. But you basically said, hey, what I thought I knew in the 90s it was right then, but it isn't necessarily right way now, right? Like, you were kind of making a correlation. Basically, what I thought I knew isn't right. So there's a lot of information that goes around in the instructor realm, right? Like, hey, this is the way it's done, and this is the way that I do it. Now, you will have majority of people that say, hey, more tools for the toolbox if it doesn't work for you, things like that. But what is your advice to instructors that do? Maybe some of the newer instructors. This might not apply to the old guard, but maybe some of the guys have been doing this maybe 6-7 years that believe that now I've formulated myself to be good at my craft, and maybe I'm a little bit resistant to change, and they think that they got it down and there's no other way to do things. How do you advise them?
I think there's two things. There's truly resistant to change, right? And that's hard because that's internal. Like, I don't know how to help you past that, right? I think that comes with time. I think over time people realize, I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers. I came into the world full-time. There weren't any full-time instructors in their 20s when I was a full-time instructor at 29. It just didn't happen. You apprenticed, you went to, you taught at Gunsight for 12 years, and then you went out on your own, or you worked at a law enforcement agency, you went to the ILFE conference, you did that for 15, 20 years, then you went on your own. It was almost always like a second career or a side career. Like, now we see a lot of people come out of the military, a couple of combat tours, they come out, they're great teachers, they're passionate about their art, their craft, or maybe maybe it is a second career, but they didn't apprentice, they didn't show up. The community is a lot more accepting of that now, right? And I really, I want to say like broke the mold, or was one of the, but I don't know of anybody else that was out there on their own doing it without that long military or law enforcement career, or as an apprentice to somebody else that showed up on the national scene, running a school, doing their own curriculum. So I showed up as the guy that was too big for his britches, or the smart ass, or the guy that was challenging things just to challenge them. So I became really sensitive real fast to, I don't know everything I think I know. And I learned a lot from some of those older guys, guys that I looked up to, the guys I was reading about in the magazines, Masad Ayub, Clint Smith. And whether I agreed with what they were teaching, like how they taught a reload on the range, or they taught the way I did, what I got a great appreciation for was that exchange of knowledge, and really came down to like core belief, right? Like because if I hear a guy like Clint Smith, again, very influential to me as a mentor and as a friend, especially when I was really hitting my, national stride or whatever in the 2000s, when I hear him talk about concepts of training and concepts of defense with a gun, it all resonates. I'm like, yes, 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 yes. But then when I would see what he was teaching technically on the range, I'd be like, but no, that's not the application of that fundamental principle, knowing what I know, believing what I believe. And back in the day, people didn't bring in kinesiology. People didn't bring in neuroscience. People didn't bring in non-cognitive decision-making. We didn't know, as a community, we didn't even know to study that stuff. 30 years ago, the field of neuroscience didn't even exist as it exists now. And I took deep dives into that world, into the psychology world, into the neuroscience world, into kinesiology, into anatomy, physiology, how the eye works, how we process visual information, how we make decisions. Took a lot of deep dives into that area, because what I was believing, what I thought was right, the best way I thought to teach somebody to use a gun to defend themselves was not what was being done a lot in the 90s. And I had to figure out why. Or was I wrong? Or could I explain it? Or were maybe both things right, but from a different perspective, or with a different base of knowledge, right? And that was an early lesson for me about being wrong, and about being open to evolve, and about really breaking things down to fundamentals. Because overwhelmingly, you can have 10 instructors sit at a table and they will all agree on some core baseline fundamental concept, right? Like, the static range isn't the equivalent of a gunfight. Okay, we all agree on that. So therefore, what's the best way to run a static range? Because we have to run a static range sometimes. It's just the reality of the situation. Big law enforcement academy classes, new shooters, concealed carry permit classes, whatever. What's the best way to do it? Well, from agreeing on that kernel of fundamental knowledge, a lot of people reach different conclusions about the best thing to do on a static range, especially for new shooters. That's okay, you know. So I think that's my advice to guys that think they have the way is don't worry about what you're doing at 10:30 in the morning on the range. Break that down to a base fundamental and have a conversation with the instructor that you think is doing it totally wrong. You probably have a lot in common at that base fundamental, and then you can find where you diverge. You can find the explanations for why you diverge, and it'll be something. It'll be a little kernel of well, I learned this, or I believe this, or I experienced this, or my mentors say this. And I think the more objective that answer is when you diverge, the better it is, right? So I can't say my grandpa taught me this and take it seriously. I can't say my mentor, the guy I was reading about in the gun magazines in 1988 that I look up to as a guru, I can't say, well, because he says so, that's why. Right? I need to have science. I need to have some objectivity. For somebody else, it may be enough. You know, I got through, back then it was the Nam, you know. I got back from the Nam and I believe this is what saved my life, so I'm going to teach it to other people. Now it might be Iraq or Afghanistan, or it might be 20 years as a cop in Miami or whatever. That's what got you through it, so that's what you're going to teach. Cool. I get that now in a way that I didn't 15, 20 years ago. When it comes to
Sorry, Rob. Give me 1 second. Hey, guys, look over this way. I think it's landed right down here. Sorry, the kids are coming to my yard. I think it landed right around that way. Got it? Cool beans. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to being willing to have that discussion and finding the common ground. Like so many times when you disagree with somebody, find that common ground. Like anybody disagree, oh, you're a traitor to the Second Amendment. Okay, well, let's not talk about what you think I said that made me the traitor to the Second Amendment. Let's go back and talk about the Second Amendment. Maybe we're not even talking about the same thing. And if we both believe the same way about the Second Amendment, then let's stair step and walk to the point where we diverge. And it's probably not as mysterious as it seems why somebody would say I'm a traitor to the Second Amendment. Okay, well, maybe it has to do with this moment. Like, this is really super important to you. It's not as important to me. Like, we're on parallel paths doing the same thing. But this other thing turns out to be really important to you, and it's not that important to me. That's okay. But that doesn't make me a traitor to the Second Amendment. It means we don't agree on something. And nor do I think that you are a fool that doesn't understand the Second Amendment, right? Like, if you look at the way I respond to a lot of these people, it's not, like I said, I get their passion. I think they believe they are 100% right. I just think that there needs to be a better discussion about the details and the underlying premi, right, that get you to where you are. So I think that's the thing instructors need to do more. And I've had I mean, people can go back and look at, I've written about it for decades. Instructor conferences, they're the best because you go to these conferences or even end user conferences like the ILFE conference, SWAT roundup. And I taught at these things for decades. You know, I was invited to teach at conferences all over the world. I would go every chance I got. I don't do it as much anymore. But there was a period of time when I couldn't go to enough. I go to 15 conferences a year because that's what creates those conversations. Maybe not on the range, maybe at the bar afterwards, but that's what creates those conversations. And you get on the same page a lot more than you end up on divergent pages when you're really talking, that dialogue.
And you know what, man? I think that's good. I often tell people this. It's like, I believe that there is a couple of things that happen to individuals that want to teach firearms. And I have a whole philosophy about recently, you know, because I wasn't around to understand NAM or things like that, but I was alive when we started having all the Middle Eastern conflicts and things of that nature. And I believe when all the boys started coming back home, to your point, they taught what they knew, right? And I think that was the boom of tactical, right? And it's great, and I'm not knocking that. I think what's happened, though, is that you get a lot of different people that maybe don't have that military background. Some have no law enforcement experience whatsoever or no military. But they're good at teaching and they're great at guns, right? And they want to do both. So let me ask you this. Where, like specifically, where can, say, he or she go that maybe I don't have that background? I don't have the first idea about how to get a cert outside of the NRA, but I'm good at this. And it's proven because I've taught 300 people and they're all loving me. Where can I go to take that extra step to hone my skills and be accepted and get more certs?
I was with you. I had a really good answer until you said, and get more certs.
Okay, take the certs out. Give me your answer.
I think it's important because that is the way a lot of people approach this, right? Like, they got to have the paper, right? Mm-hmm. And some of the smartest people I know on a great many topics don't have the paper on the wall that says I'm supposed to trust them as an expert on that topic. And this is not just guns, right? So autodidactic education is real. I bet a lot of people have, and that just means self-taught, self-learning. A lot of people have taken to self-learning and when you look at the cost of college, when you look at the cost of vocational schools, the disappearance of vocational education to a large extent in our country over the last 30 years, you have to go out and learn this stuff hands-on. You have to go out and find a mentor. You have to go online. I mean, the number of times I look at YouTube for how to do something mechanical or how to like chainsaw. I was with a guy who's one of the best garage shade tree mechanics guys that I know, and he has a professional background at working for in the aerospace world as a technical hands-on kind of guy. But that doesn't mean he knows everything about every vehicle, right? So we were trying to change an alternator last week, and we went online and looked at a YouTube video of a guy who works on that car, that model, that's what he knows. That's what he does. What's his advice? We looked at 2 videos. What's their advice on how to the best way, most efficient way to get the alternator out of this vehicle and back and the new one back in? Because that guy's an expert. Now, I didn't need to see that guy's paper. I don't know what certifications that guy has. I don't know if he went to school for that manufacturer model. I don't know if he's ASE certified tech. I know that his advice was sound. He presented it well. The video was clear, right? And when we did what he said to do, primarily the one that we ended up settling on, that alternator came out and it went back in, and it was 20 minutes getting it out, if that, and 12 minutes getting it back in, and it worked just fine. You know, I had to go to O'Reilly's and switch it out, come back and put it in. So I learned that from some guy on the internet. I don't care what his paper is. So I think there's 2 different questions. How do I get better at my craft? How do I become more educated? How do I get better at teaching this thing? Because a lot of people put way too much stock in that military or law enforcement experience, way too much stock in that NRA paper. How do we do that better? So a few years ago, I had the opportunity several times over the last 10, 15 years, I've had the opportunity, but specifically where I'm going with this, because you mentioned the certifications, a few years ago, I sat down with the United States Concealed Carry Association. I've been associated with them forever, put on their advisory board in 2009, did the first distance education program they ever put together, the first real distance education program I ever put together. We launched in 2013, and they came to me and said, we want to do a live fire program for concealed carry, home defense, defensive shooting, whatever you want to call it, to rival and maybe take some bandwidth from the NRA basic pistol class that gets so much traction, even though it's not even a defensive shooting course. Are you interested? Hell yeah, I'm interested. Let's talk about this. So we put together a curriculum called Defensive Shooting Fundamentals through the USCCA that gives people what I think, and now what our team thinks. It started obviously with the kernel of, well, here's my program. And to be fair, my program had a bunch of influence from outsiders, as we discussed in the last show and now. So then their team came in, and we worked with their team to refine and develop, and then we started putting it out into the field, and that means our students, the instructors, some of whom have years, let that light go by, years of experience, right? Thousands of students that have told them they're good at this, how do they get better, that have come to the USCCA or maybe come to me. And for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been funneling almost everybody that asks me about instructor development at the concealed carry permit, local, regional, armed defense shooter thing, into that program because I wrote it, right? And my cadre, the guys that were leading and teaching all over the world with me under the combat focus shooting program, became the lead cadre of the USCCA program. So obviously that's where I send people. And that might seem like self-serving, marketing, self-promotion, whatever, but how can I in good faith, if I wrote the damn program and was instrumental in guiding it to fruition, how can I say, oh, go over here? Because in fairness, I don't know of another program that is as good. If you want to teach people defensive shooting skills more efficiently and in a better way, that's the place to go. And if I thought anything different, shame on me, because I shouldn't be cashing that check if I don't think that's the best program in the world. And I say that. People have to, there's a lot of false humility sometimes. Well, there's a lot of places you can go. Well, there are, but if I didn't think my program was the best, why am I teaching it? I've caught a lot of flack for that. I got disinvited to a training conference once over this back and forth I had with the host over using the word pinnacle in my marketing. So on the combat focus shooting program or the IC training company website, whatever, it says the pinnacle of defensive handgun instruction or defensive handgun program. And somebody took exception to that. And I'm like, bro, if you don't think your program is the pinnacle, you shouldn't be teaching. Why would you be taking people's money for life and death stuff if you don't think you're giving them the best you can give them? You know? So I say that like with all the caveats. What I think is most important, though, again, goes back to the craft, not the paper, you know? So you have to find a program that resonates with you. You have to find instructors that resonates with you. There's an old cliche like any class is good. Even if you learn what not to do, the class is worth taking. That's bullshit. That comes from the public sector. You remember, so much of our training community I say, I don't think it is as much anymore, but it was through the 80s and 90s, from the birth of the program, you know, and you know, thank you, Jeff Cooper, and thank you, Gunsight. The birth of private sector training was born on the back of public sector training, right? It was guys coming from the military and law enforcement saying, well, this is what we did. Now we're going to find ways to make it work. And then you added in the competition shooting, but they were almost indistinguishable for a time in the 80s, right? The competition shooting and defensive training and what was going on at Gunsight and IPSC and then IDPA, Hackathorn, and those guys broke out and did IDPA. And it was still like what was happening in the training world was sort of dictating some of that stuff in the competition world. Now it's completely different worlds, and people acknowledge it as different. That's why Latham and I had that Worlds Collide thing that ran for a couple of years, because it resonated with people. Defensive shooting and competition shooting are radically different now, but people didn't know that in the 80s and 90s to a certain extent, and they were overlapping. The thing that has happened since then is we've broken away from that public sector mold, but some of those cliches exist. So think about it. When you're a cop and you're sent to a school, you have to go. The sergeant's telling you to go. When you're in the military and your turn comes up, you're going to this school, you have to go. So one of the ways we rationalized around going to a school you didn't want to go, or going to the school at the academy that was taught by some jackass that couldn't handle it in the street, and he was just reading from a thing or reading a PowerPoint to you, or putting a transparency, for those of us that remember that, you know.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like
yeah.
The guys that were just reading from a script, that class was going to suck. So one of the things that was said was, well, just go. Even if you only learn one thing, it's worth going. Well, when the government's paying you to go, that makes sense. But when you're spending your hard-earned dollars, when you're taking time away from your family, when you're going to a class like I'm going to put on, you can't show up thinking, well, even if I learn what not to do, then you're a hobbyist. Now you're a training hobby. And those exist. Great. You paid some of my bills. You're a training hobbyist. You just want to go collect the paper. You want to go to the classes. I get it. But don't ever tell somebody that's hungry, somebody that really wants to learn, a new shooter, go to any class, because as long as you learn something, even if you learn what not to do, it was worth going. That's not true. Today, if somebody's charging more than $50 for that course, they better have a website. They better have videos on Instagram. They better have a YouTube channel. They better have published a book. They better have written articles. If somebody's charging you $200 a day and you can't get a really good idea what they're going to be teaching you, don't pay them $200 a day. Because every one of those guys, every one of us that's out there doing it, you included, we have a way to find out, what am I going to learn out there? What am I going to learn from that guy? We have customers out there that'll tell you what the class was like. They'll tell you what your experience is like. And then you make an educated decision as a consumer with a lot of options about where you're going to spend your money and where you're going to spend your time. So the instructors need to do the same thing. They need to look at how long people have been doing things, what they've been doing, what they're saying, what books have they published, what articles have they written, what videos have they put out, who are they working with, who are they collaborating with, and then make the decision, is this where I'm going to hone my craft, or am I just going to collect a piece of paper?
Hey, man, you know what? I'll say ouch. And one thing you said, I'll say ouch. And it was in relation to, hey, if I only learn, one thing, even if it's not what not to do, I'll take it. And you know what? I got to give you it. You hit it. You got me. I have to say ouch. And that was because no matter what the training was, like when we had to go do whatever post-cert class report, whatever the crap they sent me to, that was what was said. It's like, just freaking go. But I never thought about it, and I just kept that mentality until you just said that. And I mean, I've said it, but I never connected them. I never thought about when you were telling someone that is coming out of their own bank account.
Yeah.
With logistics, trap, ammo, all that crap, right? And then the price of the course. Well, yeah, you're right. But I have also told individuals this, like, hey, think about what you want to do, whether it's just training or whether you're trying to develop yourself as a teacher. What do you want to do? And then you need to seek out someone that is helping you with that. Somebody that when you look at their curriculum, you're like, okay, cool, this will push me. Okay, great, this is the avenue I want to go down. And then I like to tell people another thing too. And I tell every single instructor that I go to, and I've trained with some pretty damn good ones, and I walk up and I'm just as bold as shit. I'm like, yep, please understand, I am here to steal from you. I tell them all that. Tell them all that. And normally the response you get is, yeah, you pay for the information. You're not stealing it, right? And I tell them that because that's the mentality I think more people should adapt. Like, hey, I'm coming here because I've trusted you. I've heard good things about you. Maybe I just assume good things about you. So I'm coming here spending this hard-earned money with you because I want what you have, period. There's no other reason I'm here. So I like the fact that you said that. You know, I'll say ouch, because that's a checkmate move. That's pretty good. And it's another reason why I developed the Train and Learn event. Was another, not just instructors, but the whole thing, like, where can people go pull information from, because I was seeing a lack of that. And not just teaching, not just gun instruction, but because obviously we're not certifying anybody at Train and Learn. But we're giving you the information, how to build your website, where your strong suits are, how to network, you know, how to handle sponsorships at companies.
Yeah, I was really excited about your event. Like I said, I don't do that many conferences. And what's happened is 10, 15 years ago, there weren't